Chapter 8. The biggest win of my life. Following the El Triumph, I had many other huge victories before I became associated with the World Wrestling Federation. The most impressive and significant, however, came when I won the hand of Evansville native Amy Gartner in marriage. Now get this picture. Here I am, Catholic, Italian, and from New York. Miss Gartner, on the other hand, religion, Baptist, nationality, Baptist, place of origin, Bible Belt. In other words, this all had the makings of a sitcom. When I met Amy, I knew within a short period of time that she was the one for me. The truth is, the minute I set foot in Indiana, I knew I would marry a girl from the Midwest. There was just so much more humans. They were just so much more human, so much nicer. The majority of Long Island girls were all about themselves, the hair, the makeup, which club they were going to. They referred ever on a journey to get themselves over, a wrestling term we'll get more into later. Their popularity and status meant everything. The only way they knew was their way. In Indiana, it was different. I mean, the girls actually cared for you, just like your mother did. They cooked for you, coddled you, babied you, and catered to you around the clock. I now realize at the time I met Amy, maybe it was a combination of a mother thing. The fact that I left home at 19 and moved 1,000 miles away didn't mean I was ready for the experience. And a male chauvinistic thing, the way my mother dominated my father. But I'm neither ashamed or embarrassed to say I needed a woman who would take care of me. When I met Amy in my junior year at Indiana State, I knew she was the woman. I was already tired of the dating scene, and I just wanted one special person to come home to. Vince Russo adds here, recently my son Will asked me, Dad, how do you know when you're in love? Even though I know that's the age-old question, I actually think I know the answer. I love my wife Amy because she was and is everything that I'm not. She filled the missing pieces to my puzzle and made me whole. Whereas I was strong, bullheaded, confident, and driven, Amy was the complete opposite. Vulnerable, fair, honest, and fulfilled with life. Whoever coined the phrase opposites attract was dead on the money. Amy and I had nothing in common. In contrast, when you look at my relationship with Elle, she was everything I was. She wasn't my better half, as Amy is, because she was me. And you wonder why I believe in God. There's no coincidence brought me to my perfect mate. There's no way coincidence brought me to my perfect mate, living in Evansville, Indiana, of all places. Consider the road which led me to Amy in the first place. I had to graduate high school early, enroll in college, realize I wasn't ready for it, drop out of college, get a real job in the real world on a real assembly line where my father worked, realize I had to go back to school, run into a friend who I hadn't seen in over a year and let him talk me into going to college in Evansville, Indiana. That's fate, my friends. That's the Lord's plan. If it hadn't been for Amy, I don't know if I would have ever been able to survive the wrestling bubble. I somehow landed in it. Amy was my rock, my constant, my backbone, and today I thank God for providing such a gift. All right, back to his original text. He writes, from the first months I spent with her, I could tell Amy was a saint, hands down the nicest person I had ever met. I envisioned myself spending the rest of my life with her. There was just nobody more complimentary to me. Unfortunately, I don't think Amy's mother felt the same way about the relationship as I did. Though this would be the biggest battle of my life to date. The main event. In one corner, you had an Italian Catholic from New York, while in the other corner stood a self-righteous General Baptist from Middle America, USA. There's no question I was the underdog going into this one. I had everything stacked against me, including the home field advantage. On paper, this appeared to be a war I couldn't possibly win, something I thrived on. In Alta Gartner's mind, I had no business dating her daughter. Yeah, I said Alta. In the Midwest, people have unfamiliar names like that. Amy's grandmother and aunt were named Ora and Ura, for crying out loud. Getting back to Alta, she didn't approve of me, and I knew it. I was everything she did not want in a son-in-law, and I took great exception to this. I treated Amy like gold and literally cherished the ground she walked on. But in my view, this made no difference to Alta. On more occasions than one, I tried to have civil discussions with Alta, trying to let her know how I truly felt about her daughter, but those words seemed to fall on deaf ears. It seems that every conversation we had, Alta would turn to her Bible and start quoting from it, a ritual that rubbed me the wrong way. I never appreciated it and still don't. when people use the Bible in a sense, to scold you. If you are non-Christian, those words aren't going to mean anything to you. Nothing. This was exactly where I stood. Even though she felt she was doing the right thing at the time, in essence, Alta was distancing herself from me. Now he adds to the text again. If you are just joining us, Vince Russo has his original writings in more of a larger font, and then when he adds something like an addendum, they're in smaller writing. So here's an addendum. Since becoming a Christian, life in general has become much more clear. If Alta sat down with me today and recited some of those words, we would be in unison on each and every verse. But back then, write down these words, I wasn't ready. In the past year, I've learned firsthand that you can't force Christianity on anybody if they aren't ready to receive it. No matter how hard you preach, it will simply go in one ear and out the other, just like Alta's words did with me. To accept the words of God, your heart has to be ready. The only one who can do that is God himself. God spent 42 years preparing me to understand his vision, but that vision was understood not on anyone else's time, but on his. As much as I respect and appreciate my mother-in-law today, I feel she made a mistake in quoting the Bible to me at the time when I wasn't ready to understand. Today, as I spread God's word among the boys, I am too faced with the dilemma. You're not going to save anybody, and quite frankly, it's not the job of Christians to even attempt to do so. All we can do is try to lead you to the Lord or make you aware of him. If your heart is ready, he will take it from there. While I'm on the subject, I'd like to clarify one point. Even though I'm a Christian, I'm not religious in being a Christian. I'm simply saying that I'm a follower of Christ. I read his word, study the Bible, pray on it, and attempt to walk this earth in a manner that he did. Religion to me means rules and regulations. You can do this, but you can't do that. Religion is man-made, while Christ is the real Magilla. Christ is the real Magilla. Remember, there is only one God. No religion is necessarily right or wrong. It's just an interpretation of God's word. That's why I was turned away from religion and turned toward God. I just didn't realize it at the time. The difference between those two schools of thought is crucial. Don't let religion scare you. Rather, allow God himself to enlighten you. Back in the original text, Vince writes, despite the religious differences between Alta and myself, the truth was I loved Amy for who she was, not what she was. I just wish that her mother had understood that. But the harder Alta made it for me, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to lose Amy regardless of the circumstances. So the struggle continued. Alta would pull Amy one way while I yanked her in the other. It went back and forth like this for a while, till Alta gave me the motivation I needed. I'll never forget it. One day during one of our coming to Jesus conversations, Alta looked me square in the eye and said, I just don't see your point, Vin. When you graduate in college, you're going to go back to New Jersey anyway. Without hesitation, I replied, how do you know that? How do you know I won't marry your daughter and take her with me? Alta laughed confidently and said, oh, I doubt that. Without even realizing, Alta had lit me up like a WWF pyro. The one response gave me all the incentive I needed. From that point on, I knew I wasn't going to lose. I wouldn't allow it. How dare she? Did she have any idea who she was dealing with? I was from New York. From that point on, I was on a quest. I knew that I was going to have to eat it for a while, being that I was on Alta's turf. But at the end of the game after graduation, Amy was coming home to Yankee Stadium. Once that diploma was in my hands, and I was out of Evansville patch, victory would be mine. In my mind, I knew exactly how it would play out. Alta was no longer a threat. I kept my cards close to the vest without revealing my hand, but I knew that when the final card was played, I would be raking in the entire pot. As graduation grew near, I knew I had to pop the question to Amy. Regardless of what her mother thought, I was truly in love with her. I just couldn't see waiting to get married. That would have meant me just seeing Amy on holidays until we were ready. No way. I was ready now. Like everything else in my life up to that point, I was going all the way with this. So one night in a Chinese restaurant, I proposed. She accepted, and we set a date for September 10th, 1983. Now the pressure was on. I was graduating college in May, getting married in September. I had to get a job and prove to Alta that I could support her daughter. In the meantime, I knew Alta would be working on Amy, trying to change her mind, while I looked for employment in New York. Vince goes on to write, just to set the record straight so there's no heat, no misunderstanding, let me publicly state to the world that today I wholeheartedly love my mother-in-law. Why? Because not only did I grow up, I now also have a little angel of my own. Her name is Annie. In my early 20s, I couldn't understand Alta's point of view and didn't want to. But as they say, God works in mysterious ways. With unconditional love I have for Annie. I can only imagine 10 years from now her bringing home a 20-year-old Vince Russo at that age. I was a rebel, and Alta saw right through me, as good as any other mother would. Vince Russo was ready to take over the world and go through anybody to get there, including her. That's all Alta was trying to do, protect her daughter. To her credit, Alta had enough love for her daughter to let Amy go and find out for herself. I think in her God-loving spirit, Alta may have also believed that this kid from New York really did love her daughter. Today, Alta can know she did the right thing by allowing her daughter to grow up. Even though it might not necessarily have followed her time frame, that's love. And that's why, after being married to her daughter for 21 years, I now feel proud that I didn't let Alta down. You know, I always used to tell people that my mother-in-law and I had nothing to talk about. We lived in different worlds, with different morals, different values, and different ideas. For the first time a little while ago, Alta and I sat down and opened up a bit to each other. This time, what was different from all those other times was that we had God in common. It took me 21 years to see where Alta was coming from, and as I listened to her words of wisdom, I could only say to myself, what was I thinking? But then again, I also realized that I wasn't ready. At that point in my life, it wasn't all about God. It was all about me. After a 21-year journey on a very dark and desolate highway, my heart changed. God was now first in my life, and Vince Russo was bringing up the rear. As I sit here thinking about my marriage to Amy, I actually can't understand how it's possible. For 20 years, I just wasn't there, not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. I can remember Amy's infamous battle cry, "We don't communicate." My response was, "I don't want to communicate. I want to watch the game." So we didn't communicate. We were just kind of there, looking back. I just didn't know how to be a husband, and once the kids were born, I didn't know how to be a father. I was so young. I didn't know who I was, who I was supposed to be. I now know for a fact that God was always there. Always. There's just no other reason why this woman would have stayed with me. God gave me the greatest girl of my life in Amy, and he gave her to me for a reason. For 20 years, Amy tried to lead me to God, but I wouldn't listen. There was just too many other things that were more important to me. I don't know how, but Amy never quit and never stopped believing. So here we are today, communicating with the topic of discussion usually being God. To make you really understand how profound that statement is, I'm going to reprint a paragraph from the original manuscript, which I wrote 2 years ago, so you can experience firsthand the psyche of old Vince, the exact paragraph, word for word. Can you believe when Amy gets home, it gets hot at me, she says, "We have nothing in common." How many guys have heard this line over and over again? I say this, we have nothing in common. So what? Do I expect Amy to be a San Francisco Giants fan? Do I expect her to watch girls show Howard Stern their boobs every night on E? Do I expect her to stay up until 3 a.m. with me in hopes of catching Shannon Tweed naked on Cinemax? These are the things guys do. They're guys. They're guy things. I mean, think about things women like Oprah and that goof she has on her show, Dr. Phil, Martha Stewart, that blank Lifetime channel. Please, any guys who have things in common with their wives aren't guys. They're women. Now you're going to read that and tell me God doesn't exist. I actually thought that was funny, and I wrote it. Now I see it as one of the saddest things I've ever read. By the way, today, I never missed Dr. Phil. And that was chapter 8.